So welcome. This is the first session for today, and the topic is urban water challenges, and you can see really where is the bottleneck, and this is intended to be a conversation rather than a talk. Although we have four very distinguished panel members with very deep-rooted experience in South Asia and particularly in water. So as I usually say that if you just take those four, I think this is probably over 200 years of experience. So there, maybe more. So the idea here is that at least from those can we tease out a few of the wisdom. So this is intended to be a conversation rather than a talk. The way we have structured it is to start with a very general overview. So I'll spend a few minutes and then I'll pass it on to different panel members. And we're looking at South Asia from the way the entire symposium is focused on regionalism. So we're starting at a very large scale, at the SAARC scale to almost multi-country, then come to the country scale, city scale, and to the slum scale. So from very large to very small. So we are using scale as a way to zoom in. So idea is to essentially to look at one or two problems for each scale and see really what can or cannot be done. It's not that just we are impressed with the beauty of the problem, because the problem is very well understood, as you'll see in a second. And this is, I have been hearing this since I was a graduate student, that every 8 seconds one child dies due to lack of clean water. And has not changed very much really. And then you go here, this is what we have decided, that we have basically run into victory about 5 years ahead of schedule. Millennium Development Goal tells us that we want to make the access to clean water by half by 2015. And 2010 we declared victory, that we have already done it. So what does that mean? Now if you look at closely really, this is what it means. That Millennium Development Goal essentially looks for 20 liters per person per day. If this is what I have as improved water, within 1 kilometer of my house, I have access. Now if you look at something else, the water scarcity maps across the globe, that is a different number. We use 1,000 meter cube per person per year. And that translates to 2,740 liter per person per day. It's less than 1%. That what I need to provide access to clean water. So there's a significant disparity between these two numbers. And these were intended to be really put at that context. Yes, we need water for food, we need water for our beef and everything else. Those are not included in this 20. But 20 is what is used as a measure to see whether we have access to water. 2,740 on the other hand is used to say that whether I have water scarcity or not. So does access basically is limited by scarcity? That's a question we need to ask really. If we ask this question, really, I come to something totally different. This has nothing to do with water. This is a briefing that was given about 3 years ago to the US general who was running Afghanistan. So the question in the morning, in the briefing session like this at 8:30, was that we want to increase popular support in Afghanistan by US Army. What should we do? So this is what we have been doing for last 10 years in Afghanistan. So we have all kinds of relationship, networks, and nodes and activity that was going on. If you look at this, is a mess. And this mess is really not unique. This mess, I can write the same mess if I want to supply water to Dhaka. Dhaka has 20 different ministries that supplies different type of services in Dhaka, from water infrastructure to roads to everything else. There are 5 different municipalities. And now if you put all of these things and try to make this, it becomes a very strange mess of spaghettis. And that is what the heart of the problem is. So we are looking at this problem. This is a very complex problem. But the complexity really is not in the way this is being portrayed. But this is what exactly was shown to the general. The question was really, how do I increase popular support? So this is what we are trying to do. If I really want to focus on that particular problem, then what we can do really, we can look at, maybe everything is not important. Really. Maybe some of the nodes and some of the links, some of the relationship that we have here may not even matter. So if we just zoom back and try to look at this problem, what we see is this. Oops. See, I'm looking at this particular node. That node is to increase popular support. And then if you see really that many of the things are not actionable. Afghanistan has a very rugged terrain. That's not going to change. Some of the things are not really violent. Some of the interventions may not be even military. So what is important really then? What you find out, there are only two things which are important. In this particular case, if you want to increase the popular support, one is that you have to develop trust between the ethnic groups. Second one, that you have to have some type of transparent development plans for Afghan people. If you do these two, you'll get it done. You don't need the mess. The question for us really, if I want to address urban water challenges in South Asia, what are those key challenges? And those challenges will probably change from city to city. Whether you are in Dhaka or in Delhi, it's different problems. What we are hoping to do really, can we identify at least a couple of these binding constraints or enabling conditions that will allow us to intervene and make a measurable outcome. So to do this really, they will start with something very simple. So how do I make sense of all this mess? So the way we are thinking about this problem is that, why do I do this really? Why do I want to do this? Or for whom? Do I really want to supply water to the slums in Dhaka or in Karachi? If that is what I am trying to do, then how do I do this? So first I need to ask really, why am I doing this? For whom am I doing this water problems? Then I go either from my values, meaning that this is what I want to do, and this is how I will do it. Meaning this, I want to go and look at really what is the bottleneck. Is the bottleneck coming from because there is a 40% loss of water in Delhi water supply system? Or is it because that I don't have enough water in Dhaka? These are very different problems. So the question then becomes really why I'm doing this and how am I going to do this? So these has to go in sequence. So we want to start first asking that why, for whom, and then how. That brings us to these 4 general ideas that we have. So this idea that I'll try to contextualize really what I mean. So first we want to see really what is that network, the network that the mesh that I showed you. That mesh could be really developed for really any city you want, for any problem you want. But then it becomes extremely messy. So to focus that, we're asking 3 questions. So water for whom, at what scale, and at what cost? If I do this really, then my question is a little bit more focused. So let's bring it to Dhaka. So Farhana will talk about a little bit more about this particular problem at the slum scale. Let's say I want to supply water to slums in Dhaka. So that's my for whom. At what scale? Slum scale. At what cost? We'll find out really what the cost is. Now if you go there, what you see really, although we are having this 768 million people doesn't have access to water, there are over 1 billion people live in slums in the world. So that means these people are not even counted. Why are not they counted? In Dhaka, if you do not have a land, you do not have access to water because you don't have an address. So your address is also linked with really whether you can get utility. Whether it's water or energy does not matter. So that means the poorest of poor in Dhaka really are paying much more than the elites because they don't have an address, so they have to get water from a truck or from the mafia. So that defined my context and my problem. Now, what do I need? If I really want to supply that water, it cannot be done because Dhaka Wasa cannot provide water, although they have enough water. They have 2 billion basically liters of water every day. That is what is needed for Dhaka, but they cannot supply it to slums because those are illegal. So that's a different problem. So there I need to basically get them involved. So that is what I call this represent and refine the problem. Once you do that, so there is an NGO really 5 years ago started working on called DSK. They figured out a way that, look, if we become the guarantor, we will become a middleman between the Dhaka Wasa and the slum. We will guarantee that they will pay, although they don't have an address. So that's a very interesting intervention. So they not only diagnosed the problem, they found out a correct intervention for that scale. Once you understand that that is the constraint, then you can supply water. And they have done it remarkably well. They are right now providing about 100,000 people with that amount of water. But Dhaka has 4 million people in slums. So 100,000 is not enough. So once we understand that problem, can I now scale it up? That is what the question is really. And how do we scale this up? These are the types of problems that we want to focus on so that we have a very targeted problem for a very contextual application that I can actually see and measure. Water is a basically very messy problem because this has all kinds of scales involved in it. So I'll just show 2 scales here, just in space and time. If you look at 3 different things, if I look at infrastructure, actual natural system, and the governance system, depending on what problem I want to focus on, I could be a different scale. Let's say I want to look at climate change, a very hot topic, although it may not have anything to do with supplying water to slums. Climate change, although it's a very important problem and very significant, but for supplying water to slums has no relevance. Why do I say that? This is a problem that is at a decadal scale on over millions of square kilometers. Slum really is at a scale of maybe 1 square kilometer. So particular climate change may have an impact, but not at that scale. So we need to understand at what scale I'm interested in and how different systems, like from the infrastructure system to natural system and governance system, are they overlapping? Some of them may not even overlap. If they don't really, so creating a lot of intervention at that scale may not have the intended impact that I want at the scale that I want. So that brings me to my last slide, and that's where I'll stop and we'll pass it on to Peter really. So if you look at scale, there are all kinds of scale. So just look at spatial scale. I can go from a very small scale, from a patch, and that patch could be slum, to the global scale. That's only in space. In time, I can go from few seconds to almost multi-decadal variations. Weather is a scale that may be very important in few seconds to few days. Climate is on the order of few months to few years, even decades. I can look at jurisdictional scale. So Dhaka has 4 different municipalities. They do not overlap to each other. Then I have country scale. Then I have SAARC scale. So these are all scales. Those could be interacting with each other. If you do not understand how they interact with each other and how they are managed, then that itself may create a lot of problems. So the issue of scale is very important. That is only in one dimension. Then you will have scale and levels also interacting with each other, meaning that I can have cross-scale interactions. A time scale may interact with spatial scale, may interact with jurisdictional scale. As a result, what will happen really, you are in a big mess. That mess simply cannot be separated out unless we decide really at what scale I'm interested in and why am I doing this and for whom am I doing this. Unless those questions are asked, we'll have this conversation for next 50 years. And I will even come and see and tell you that, okay, every 8 seconds one child dies. That cannot be simply changed unless we understand what problem we're trying to solve. So it is very important then for us really, we'll start with the panel members. Then what we hope to achieve really is from the audience with even another 200 years of experience is that what are some of these key problems that we can identify. So our hope is at the end of this session, we'll have some clue that there are few problems that we want to address over next 1 to 3 years and maybe 5 to 10 years. So 3 years from now, if we come here again for this particular conversation, we'll have some clue that we have done few things that worked and few things did not work. We have no illusion that everything that we do here really today will be all done and then basically we have a blueprint. And it will not be because the problem is quite complex. It will change over time, over space. We have no clue really what the problems will be 2 years from now. So we're hoping that at least we'll start a process that shows us some trajectory given that what we know. So I'll stop here and then I will pass it on to Peter. So Peter is probably one of the most, I think, wise and experienced individuals that I know that live in Cambridge and have experience in South Asia. So he has been working on this problem probably for the last 50 years, maybe more than that. So he is a Gordon Mackay Professor of Environmental Engineering and Professor of City Planning and the Division of Engineering and Applied Science at Harvard. So he just told me that this is his last semester as a full-time employee, but that doesn't mean that he will not be working on water, but he will just not do it actively as a full-time with no salary. Maybe he doesn't need it. And he has been working on South Asian problem, as I said, that over the last 50 years. His experience is not only in water, but also from population to natural resource development, to conflict resolution in international rivers, particularly in South Asia, as well as many other countries, including China, Philippines, Costa Rica, Pakistan, India, and Bangladesh. One anecdote that I want to share, that his views were so different than what was the existing paradigm in Bangladesh. At one point, he was not even allowed to go to Bangladesh with a visa. So this is the type of things we want. We want to stir up things where we think is the right thing to do. It may not be politically palatable, but at the same time, we recognize really that we just cannot suggest academic solutions. The solutions, those are also politically feasible. So we want to be a little bit more careful about that as well. So recently he has been working on this, not only the water, food, and energy nexus, and that is where because these things are coupled. We understand that these are coupled, but coupled not really at every scale. Because I can say that yes, water is related with food, food is related to energy, energy is related to water. All of these are connected. But then I go back to my Afghanistan diagram. Yes, everything is connected, but that does not help me really. We want to find out which of those connections are strong or which of those connections are weak, that I can intervene or strengthen. So that's where I'll stop and I'll pass it on to Peter. Please.
Let me ask the photographer, can you hear me okay? Can the rest of you in the room hear me okay? Let's get this. Well, while Shafiq is getting this set up, I want to thank him for introducing me and the problems. Seems awfully complicated. I think that first diagram explains exactly why we're in trouble in Afghanistan. Let's hope we don't get in so much trouble with water. My presentation is going to be talking about sustainable development for cities, not in South Asia exactly, but Southeast Asia. So that's close, but no cigar, I guess. The things. But I do have a lot of experience in South Asia. Okay, so this is. No, let's go back. Maybe you can pass me the thing. I can reach it. Okay. Let me just use this one. I can reach it. Okay, that's fine. Okay, so this is cities and industries with very little available water. It's so small, why bother? Less than 0.1% of the total global water availability is actually used by cities and industries. So it's a tiny drop in the ocean. The big ones are agriculture, which uses maybe 90% of the water available. So that's the big picture that we're not using very much. Why should we bother about the smaller picture? Well, Shafiq has already given some examples as to why it's hard to solve the problem at the local area. This is an interesting chart. I hate the word tipping point, but let's use it anyhow. This shows the water demanded in these various cities as a function of the GDP per person. And you can see that it goes up and up and up, and then it starts to come down. And it doesn't come down all the way. It sort of has a plateau in the thing. But notice that some of the poorer cities have been using more water than cities like Tokyo and Osaka and Taipei. So this is an interesting diagram which shows that this is water consumption liters per person per day. in Guangzhou it's reported as being over 500 liters per capita per day, which makes me as an American feel pretty good. But the Chinese are even worse than we are in using water, at least in Guangzhou. This does not include water to meet food needs, however, and this is important issue we'll get back to. And Shafiq already flagged that when he talked about the 2,700 liters needed per capita per year, per day, sorry, to feed and supply water to a population. This is a sort of a little schematic one. This is a one through city. This is typical of what we do. Is we do a variety of things. We dump the waste in our streams. Sometimes clean it, sometimes don't. Sometimes recycle some of it. But generally speaking, it's like that. The circular city, which is a concept which is being widely promoted in China right now, is something which you try and keep out most of the nutrients out of the streams and recycle as much as possible. It's not possible to recycle everything. Although I'm working with a group in Hong Kong right now who built in China a zero carbon hotel. And that's a really clever trick, to build a hotel without carbon. Well, of course, they bought their offsets from a company in Switzerland which manages these things. So the hotel looks just like every other hotel, but it's carbon neutral hotel. A lot of things we can do. Move on. Oh, there we go. Okay. Well, the footprint idea is been floating around for a long time. And I'm not generally a great enthusiast about it, but I like this little sketch that somebody did 10, 14 years ago. Neolithic, rural, and urban people. And this is the footprint in terms of total materials mobilized in the year, per year, in tons per year. And you see that our footprint has gotten bigger, although I think the urban 1991 should have been a footprint of a woman's shoe, not a man's shoe. Our feet seem to change shape. But we see that we're bringing in 100 tons per year per person and disposing of 70 tons per person of water, wastewater. And the 300 tons of lifetime storage. So that's the junk that we all accumulate in our lives. And mostly end up in the basement with our class notes from high school or whatever we say. I guess maybe you can just hit the next one. Oh, there we go. Okay, well, that was sort of the Neolithic. We're now at the end of the Neolithic. This is the end of that geological time. So somebody did a study, city limits it was called, for London in the year 2000. And this attempts to do a mass balance for materials in London. And it's a complicated diagram. But what's missing from this picture? I think next slide. Okay. No, go back one. Go back one. That one. What was missing in that picture was 876 million tons of potable water and 800 million tons of wastewater. So this is supposed to be a mass balance for that city, and they missed the largest commodities that were in the waste stream, in the inputs and outputs. Next slide. I seem to have missed a slide, but it's okay. This is the, okay, the slide's got a little bit out of order, but this is global megacities in the world. This is projections from the United Nations, and this is for 2025. And the interesting thing is this diagram on the right. The blue lines, the blue dots are all these cities that will be megacities by the year 2025. And the blue are the ones in Asia. And you see South Asia is got a lot of those dots, and East Asia has a lot, and some in Southeast Asia. But look at the chart on the left. The blue lines are the Asian cities. Asia is leading growth of megacities. Tokyo has, depending on how one defines Tokyo, whether you call it Tokyo, Osaka, or Osaka something else, or Tokyo, the city next to it. Delhi, however, is one that's predicted to grow up to 26 million. Mumbai, similarly. Dhaka is a sleeper in there. I remember working in Dhaka in 1966 when the population of Dhaka was maybe about several hundred, 200,000, 300,000, 400,000. Now it's already 14 million and well on its way to some 20 million if you look at the projections from the UN. And these are seriously made projections. However, next slide. This shows how serious you can be with, how much off you can be in your projections. This is a chart comparing 1974 estimates with city populations in the year 2000. And the lines to the right-hand side are the overestimate of the population, and the lines to the left-hand side are the underestimated population. And you can see that the underestimated ones are Dhaka, Guangzhou, Tokyo, Hong Kong, Hyderabad, Istanbul, and Bangalore. And the other ones then increasingly, Baghdad was 110% overestimated because they did have a lot of trouble in Baghdad with wars and various things. But certainly it's a cautionary tale. These are again from the UN and the World Bank. Next slide. Be careful with projections. The 29 mega cities in the UN, 21 were seriously overestimated between 1976 and 2000, some being overpredicted by 50 to 90%. So this is a cautionary tale. Of the 29, only 4 were underpredicted, and all the predictions were 20 to 40% in range. This looks like a systematic bias towards overpredicting, that the world is falling apart, everything's getting out of control. I urge caution in relying on the UN forecast. Having said that, I then in the next slides use those forecasts to demonstrate the world really is falling to pieces. Okay, next slide. Okay, water for large cities in the GMS. This is the Greater Mekong Subregion. This is a synthetic region created by the Asian Development Bank and the countries in the region because they want to look at the total development of that region, and it hangs together pretty well. I was asked to look at water demand for water demand for the cities, but I also included the food requirements. So, in the next slide, this is the countries in the region. It does not include Bangladesh, but it includes Myanmar, Thailand, Cambodia, Laos, parts of China, large parts of Vietnam, all of the, and some of the upstream reaches in China, in the different provinces. Next slide. Okay, so when we're looking for the urban water, food, energy nexus, we need to look at not just the water for water supply, which is typically what most engineering studies are done. You look at how much water you need for the cities, for drinking water, municipal water, wastewater treatment, and all those things, for sanitation. And that's the number that's reported. But the real amount of water needed for a city is water required for food and energy for food and water. So you've got much broader issues. And one of the reasons why this is important, particularly with food, is that when people move to cities, they change their diets. And so what we see is that the people move up the food chain when they move into the city for a variety of reasons. One of them is that they don't have very much time left for doing the cooking that they did in the rural areas, and they also don't have the space to build open fires in the middle of a 35-story apartment building, so you end up with the proliferation of fast foods moving up the chain toward animal products, milk, and dairy products of various kinds. So that increases the demand for food incrementally over the population. So this is not just the population needs food, the population needs even more food when they move to cities, and that's something which is typically missing in the discussion. Next slide. So this is the big cities in that region, and this is the 2010 estimate of what they're actually using. These are in million cubic meters per year, and you see Hanoi and Ho Chi Minh City are big users. Bangkok is a big user. You can see these various other cities. the Napi, I can't even pronounce the word, the new capital of Myanmar claims to have about 1 million people living there, but anybody I've spoken to who's ever been there said, nobody lives there, so. But that's, again, an official statistic that's reported in the UN database, so you have to take that with some grain of salt. But there you can see the projected water demands are going up over time as the region becomes, the cities become bigger and they become more wealthy. Okay, next slide. Okay, now taking the same cities, I added a few more actually. I added Tokyo and the blue line is the incremental million cubic meters for food to supply the cities. It's incremental to what they're getting now. The red one is the water supply and sanitation incremental demand over that time period, which is largely a population and income effect. And the green is the total incremental demand. And you can see the differences you get when you start out with the engineering solutions, the engineering discussion, which is that red line, which says that's how much water you need for the cities. But if you're looking at a broader regional basis, what you need is an awful lot more, maybe an order of magnitude more water for the cities. Next slide. Some conclusions. Okay. We're asked to be brief. Next slide. Okay. So in the region, there are serious limits on water availability and need to conserve water. This may be quite difficult given the pressures to expand the actual quantities of water supplied and broaden the coverage. So this is a region that is relatively water scarce. Even though the Mekong River runs through the middle of it, is largely unexploited for water supply because of the treaty arrangements that they have. But if you add water demand for food, the production is included. Huge amounts of additional water may be needed. Now, that's a sort of sad note to end up on, but the question is, what can you do about that? Well, I think what we need to do is to go back to the first slide and say, where is the most of the water used? Most of the water is used in agriculture. And if we have a 10% improvement of efficiency in agricultural water use, then we will actually more than double the amount of water that's available for the urban users. So that's one thing. If you're a wealthy city, you shouldn't have any problems with water supply because all you need is energy and water, energy and money, because you can install these desalination plants about 50 cents a cubic meter right now, maybe even less. And you can produce all the water you need if you have access to a brackish water supply or you're on the coast. So there's no rhyme or reason why in Chennai the city should claim it's running out of water when in fact it's surrounded by wet rice farming and it's also on a coast and it's a wealthy city that can easily afford 50 cents a cubic meter. In fact, it probably would cost them 50 cents a cubic meter to bring in water from outside of the city with the long canals and the problems with property rights and things like that. So this is the conclusion is that this is, well-known cities are thirsty for water, but often forgotten they're more hungry for water. So that they boost the food. And this is one of the problems generally around the world, is that we're in the middle of a huge transition in diets, and we're moving up to more water-intense crops. It takes 10 times as much to get the same amount of nutrition from animal products as it does from grains. But people don't want to eat grains, and I'm not recommending that they should. I think that we can do it if we're careful about improving the efficiency in agriculture. So I'll end up there. I've sort of given you the bad news and the good news right at the very end. So thank you.
So this is perfect timing. So he was given 15 minutes. He almost finished at 15. So this is what we want to follow as example, really. So next one. And unless there are clarifying questions, we will hold the questions really for the end. So if you have any particular clarifying question that you want to ask, please do so right now. Yes, the questions will be at the end, yes. So our next speaker is Afreen. Afreen Siddiqi is a research scientist in the Engineering System Division at MIT and also a visiting scholar with the Science, Technology and Public Policy program here at Harvard. She has a PhD in aerospace systems and Master of Science in Aeronautics and Astronautics. And then she has moved into something more humane and to water, food, energy nexus. So that's what she wrote in her bio that she wanted us to share with her. And so her work has focused primarily on this complexity of socio-technical systems in informing planning decisions. So bringing in ideas from systems, aeronautics, how do we understand these complex systems where society and the natural systems and the physical systems are interacting with each other. She has over 50 refereed publications, and before doing this, she was also working as a software development and in gas sector in Houston, Texas, as well as in oil industry. As Peter was finishing up really his talk that we are more thirsty or hungry, really, that is the question. The question here is that we really don't have enough, don't have any problem with either water or energy. Sun gives us really 1360 watts per square meter. If you double the carbon dioxide, really, it only accounts for 4 watts per square meter. So we have lots of energy coming from sun. We just don't know how to capture them. We also have lots of water in the ocean. We just don't know how to make them drinkable. So issue is not really that whether we are running out of water or energy. We will not. At what cost and for whom, I think, is the question. Do I really want to take that much environmental cost to desalinize water, really? Then we have enough water. So these are the questions we need to ask, really. It's not that we will run out of it. If you give me enough money, I will give you enough energy and enough water, really. Do we want to invest that or not? And for whom, at what scale? Those are the type of questions we want to come back again and again. So Afreen, it's your turn now. I'll just put it in. You want to come here or you can just use it? Yeah, please. Yeah. Let me just put it on. Give me 1 second. Let me just bring up your screen. Just go to slideshow.
Great. Okay, so I'm going to try to stick to my 15 minutes. So Peter started us off at the continental scale, I should say, or the SAARC scale. I'm going to focus our attention now at the provincial scale and talk more about Pakistan and highlight some of the recent work we've been doing. I've been collaborating with Professor Wescoat at MIT, and some of the stuff that you'll see is what we've done recently in our research. So just to quickly give you a quick background, probably many of you are already familiar with this information, but just for the benefit for all of us, I just want to quickly start out by specifying that Pakistan is a federation of 4 provinces, Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, Punjab, Sindh, and Balochistan. And the country's economy is largely agrarian. 20% of the GDP, over 20% of the GDP is dependent on agriculture. Now, this agricultural sector is dependent on the Indus River system that flows through the length of the country. The Indus and its tributaries meet in the province of Punjab, and then the Indus River meets the Arabian Sea in the province of Sindh. So this geography and hydrology links the provinces in a very fundamental way and also brings about a lot of challenges. So while there is, this linkage through the river system, there are also important differences in topography. I'm just going to quickly show you some pictures to highlight the differences that exist in the provinces. So Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, I'm going to start in a clockwise fashion, has majority of the forest lands, a lot of hills, hilly terrain. Punjab, on the other hand, has the flat plains and is the majority and essentially produces majority of the agricultural production in the country. It hosts a massive canal system that irrigates the farms, and the province of Sindh hosts the Indus Delta. This is where the river meets the sea, and the province of Balochistan, very sparsely populated, largely untouched, undeveloped, but widely perceived to host a lot of mineral wealth and mineral deposits. So these pictures, I hope, highlight the different geography that exists in the 4 provinces that comprise Pakistan. But it's not just the geography, but also the societies and the cultures in these provinces that are very different. And while these differences, provide for rich diversity, they have also brought about a lot of challenges in national integration, unity, and host a lot of challenges when it comes to water management. Okay, so the first, so we were asked, so Shafiq asked us to identify, some key challenges that we thought were relevant at a particular scale in terms of meeting water security. And at the provincial scale, I was thinking about it. And to me, although he described that I'm an engineer by training, but once you start looking at the issues of water, it doesn't take long for you to realize that the issues are not necessarily technical, but they're really social. And the critical issue, at least in the case of Pakistan and the systems that I've studied, is that of trust. There is no water deficit, just a deficit of trust between the provinces. So although, the provinces may say that, there's water scarcity and so forth, ultimately a lot of these problems can be addressed if they work together. A number of institutions at the federal level have been established. So there's the Indus River System Authority that is at the federal level in Pakistan, which serves as a body in which the different representatives from the different provinces come together to coordinate water allocation and water management. It is always paralyzed in terms of its decision making. Technology hasn't solved it either. There was a huge telemetry system that was installed at the cost of several $1 million in Pakistan to essentially allow for greater transparency. So it's typically a solution that is often called for in building trust is higher transparency. But the issue is that no matter how much transparency you may try to build, it won't help solve the problem if there isn't inherent goodwill or their vested interest working against it. So the telemetry system actually has not helped in solving some of the critical trust issues. One province accuses the other for water theft, the other, accuses the other for unfounded allegations, and on it goes. And then one thing I want to point out is that although there's a lot of literature out there that talks about the benefits for decentralization and management at the local level, what decentralization really means is that you need to have better coordination, and that's when you really get the benefit for decentralization. And when you don't have that coordination, what you end up with is fragmentation. And to some extent, this is what we find, or at least what I observe in the case of provinces in Pakistan. Each province trying to go its own way with lack of coordination, which compounds the problems related to water security. The other is provincial leadership. Case after case, if you examine the 4 provinces, there are very different stages of the development, and you can trace that out to the provincial leadership that these provinces have seen. In the case of Punjab, there has been stronger leadership, greater commitment, and one can see the results in terms of its development of the water structure, infrastructure, agriculture, and so forth. In others, that leadership has been lacking or not interested in developing its communities, and the results are apparent. So definitely leadership. And then I come to my favorite topic, infrastructure, which is that we essentially in the provinces have either too much or too little of it. So in Punjab, which is the largest agricultural province, it hosts, one of the world's largest canal systems, so it's intensely irrigated, and then it's compounded now with a huge pumping system. So I would argue that there's too much infrastructure, perhaps, that shouldn't be there. And then in other cases, there just isn't enough. The case of Balochistan, which is largely undeveloped and underbuilt. So definitely that problem exists. And then the last one is that of just the inherent capacity that exists in these provinces. The human development is very different. The financial resources of the 4 provinces are very different. The knowledge base, the technical know-how, the technical competency that exists is highly variable. And because of the different societal cultures, the people in these provinces speak different languages. The differences are that high. So they don't even speak the same language. If I go to Balochistan, I will not be able to communicate with the people there. Or if a Punjabi goes to the heart of Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, he may or may not be able to communicate with. The languages themselves are different. That's the level of differences. And that really impedes, in one sense, the integration as well as the diffusion of knowledge, of capacities, capabilities, and so forth, and comes back to the first issue of trust. Pakistan, as I like to think about it, is still a very tribal country. People associate themselves with different ethnicities and different tribes, and that has definitely been a huge hindrance in building the trust and the development capacity. So I'm going to spend the next 10 minutes, if I have, in describing some of the work we've done and looking at the issue of infrastructure and highlight some of the issues that we have looked at relating to water, energy, and food production. So coming back to my previous statement, Pakistan has developed one of the most intensely irrigated large-scale agricultural systems in the world. That's Pakistan, Northwest India. So the red portion that you see in this global map is essentially the Indus Basin and parts of northwestern India as well. So I'm going to put a circle around it here. That's the red zone at 100% or almost between 75 to 100% irrigated land. It is considered to be the most intensely irrigated at a global scale. A lot of it is because of a large-scale surface water canal network. But over time, this has gotten worse with groundwater pumping as well. So we essentially have been mapping how groundwater pumps have sort of diffused through the region. So this is a map of Punjab showing the different sub-provincial political boundaries, or districts as they're called. This shows tube-well density in 1995 and how it's grown in 2010. So essentially just a lot of infrastructure and engineered systems being installed to harness and access this water. So what does that all mean? Well, of course it has an impact on the water system, but it also means that it has impact on other systems, particularly energy. So a lot of energy is being consumed. And we essentially did a study to quantify how much energy is going into agriculture at the farm scale in Punjab. And what we find is that agriculture is now highly mechanized. So people are using tractors, a lot of machineries to process the produce, and they're also pumping water. And when you look at the breakdown, what you find is that pumping now constitutes most of the direct energy use at the farm level. And what does that mean? It means that the farmers are bearing that cost. Because this is on-farm energy use. So they have to pay for the diesel, they have to pay for the electricity and so forth. It has very direct socioeconomic consequences as well. So not only is this important to understand, what the energy breakdown is, but when you look at this in the context of food production, which we essentially did some aggregate calculations of, the total agricultural production from the province each year and total energy use, just for that aggregate measure, what we find is that the direct energy intensity for crop production in Punjab has increased from about 1 megajoules per kilogram to 1.8 megajoules per kilogram. So what it means is to get the same kilogram of food or of crop production, you have to use more energy. Well, is that really bad? One would ask, it's great. People are now using tractors. It's great, they're using more machinery. Perhaps, the cost for labor may have gone down. All of that, are valid questions to ask, that just by counting the energy and saying that it has increased may not be that bad of a thing. But it is bad when you start looking at the context in which the situation exists. So if you look at the electricity use in agriculture in Pakistan, I'll show you one example. MEPCO, which is a sub-region within the province of Punjab, the electricity sold to the agricultural sector either rivals or exceeds that sold to the industrial sector. So now that becomes an issue. Okay, so one really needs to take that into account. The contribution of the industrial sector to the economy, of course, is a lot more, but it's competing or at least using the same amount of energy as the agricultural sector is. And to put it in more stark terms, when there are outright shortages of the energy, then it becomes a really, I think, critical issue to understand and to look at. So for the past several years, Pakistan has been experiencing severe deficits in its energy supply. What you see here is the estimated supply deficit in electricity in the country in 2011 of around 4,500 megawatts. So when you have that kind of a context in the region where there's just not enough electricity or the energy is scarce, then you start to appreciate what are the trade-offs and what are the impacts on the different sectors that are relying on the energy sources. Now, of course, these are solvable issues, but they need to be understood and they need to be identified. So coming back to what Shafiq is saying, identifying, well, what are the issues? The issues vary depending on what scale you're looking at and what the system you're looking at. Definitely, at least in the case of Punjab, I think that energy is a critical area that needs to be better understood when we talk about water in the agricultural sector. So I'm going to propose sort of two things for the research agenda for the next few years. And for me, for me, when I started thinking about this, I was like, there needs to be sort of a diagnostic framework that helps us identify what the problems are. So, when we eyeball a situation, we can probably guess, perhaps with, some kind of good probability, that we can put our finger on the problems, that maybe, it's a problem of leaky pipes, or maybe it is a problem of the water mafia, or maybe it is a problem of overpumping. But do we really know for sure? So that's what I'm trying to get at, that we need to have some rigorous way of really identifying what it is, what are the problems. We may be missing something critical there. So in my view, I think there needs to be some formal methods to diagnose the problem. So to take a leaf from a book from other disciplines, how they teach medical doctors when they talk to a patient. I mean, they have, and people are pretty complex. The human biology is a very complex system, but there are methods in place that are taught to, medical practitioners, and I'm speaking here way out of my area of expertise, but just from observation, that they are taught how to figure out, or at least, try to get a sense of the problem. And what the patient may be telling you may not be the diagnosis. So if you go talk to some city manager, city water manager, what he may be telling you may not be the real problem. So that's what I'm trying to get here. And the other thing is, coming from the engineering background, there are very formal methods of testing, how a system behaves. So the whole field of, system identification and control theory, where you basically subject the system to, different signals, and you sweep through different frequencies and identify, what are the modes of behavior in that system, and what are the critical modes, and when it resonates, or what is the response. Of course, we can't do that here in complex technical systems, but I'm sure there are methods that can be developed that help us identify what the system is. And then the second thing I want to say about the future research agenda is, what I find interesting is to unpack the interdependencies. I think it's a really critical topic that we need to better understand, particularly for South Asia, because these interactions between water, energy, and food, I think, are very intense in densely populated regions. And when there are decreasing per capita resources, this problem really needs to be better understood. And what understanding this problem would allow us to do is to actually identify levers from other systems that could then impact the system that you're interested in intervening in. And I think that's sort of the promise that this approach may bring in coming up with new and innovative ways of addressing it. So just to quickly show you how research in this area has been progressing, I had plotted the number of publications that have been coming out over the last 10 years looking at this topic. They've been growing, not surprising, but when you look at the regional focus, most of the publications are based in the US, Australia, Turkey, Europe, Far East, not enough in South Asia. So we definitely need more focus, we need more attention in that region where that problem, I think, exists at very large magnitudes. And the last slide, or maybe the second last slide I'll leave you with, is the mess that I built up with Jim, in which we were trying to figure out, well, what is happening this is a snapshot of what we were trying to figure out, or what are the different loops, what are the different factors that are interacting and creating different dynamics of behavior in the system. And then only when you actually engage with this mess, I think, is when you're better able to then come up with solutions, because as they say, there are no silver bullets for a complex problem. So we have to not be afraid of this complexity. I think we have to, engage it with full force. So last, I just want to point out that there are a number of tools that help us untangle this mess. So I don't want to show you just, the mess and leave it there. I just want to show you that there are a lot of methodologies that have been developed in different fields that can be be applied to untangle or unravel this mess. So stakeholders analysis, looking at the power structures and the stakeholders involved, dependency analysis, whether it's between physical systems or between people or whatever, graph theory networks analysis, very sophisticated, very well developed now, decision analysis, I can go on, but there are a lot of tools, very well developed methodological tools that are out there that I think we need to make more use of in understanding some of these questions. So with that, I think I will leave, yes, with this last slide in connecting why the provincial scale matters if we're concerned with urban water challenges. And in my view, there are three things that directly connect provincial level water management to cities. And one is the intersectoral reallocation of water. If we are to divert water from agriculture to cities, that's going to happen on the provincial scale. It is going to be the provincial authorities that you have to work with, that cities will have to engage with, if they are to ask for more freshwater diversion away from agriculture. Whether that diversion comes through water savings in agriculture, which is then diverted to cities, or some other mechanism, or wastewater reuse, on and on. It has the intersectoral reallocation, which will have to happen if we are to address water security for the cities, has to be done at the provincial level. Second thing is of water quality. So when cities are drawing, especially surface waters along river streams, the upstream and downstream cities, they have to engage with the provincial authorities to come up with mechanisms in which that surface water quality is managed and maintained. And the last one is of integrating the connected resources. Again, that has to happen at the provincial level. So with that, I will end, and I hope I haven't taken more of my 15 minutes. But
Great. Oh, okay.
Thank you, Afreen. I didn't use the word mess. I think this is exactly what it is. And I do like this word, and I'm glad that she did use. This is a messy problem. And so we just cannot be just overwhelmed by the beauty of the problem. That, yeah, it's a very messy problem that we've been doing for quite some time. What I think she has done remarkably well that we need to recognize it's a messy problem and then find out how to at least start approaching this. And that's what we're hoping to do. Our next speaker is Dr. Jim Wescoat, and he will look at a different scale. Now it is a little bit smaller than the provincial scale. He has worked extensively on from very small basin scale to urban scale to even local South Asia scale. But today I think his focus would be on more on a city scale. He is a Aga Khan professor in the Department of Architecture at MIT. He has worked extensively on the Indus Basin. He is probably one of the most authoritative person here in KMTC on Indus River. And he has been working on many aspects of Indus River. Today I don't think you talk about Indus, but for other parts of the water problem in South Asia. At a larger scale, Dr. Wescoat has conducted water policy research from here in Colorado to Indus, to Ganges, and Great Lakes region. And I will let him basically take over and then focus on the city scale and then give us some insight into exactly what the critical needs
Great. Well, thanks very much, Shafiq, and good morning to everybody at this. We have really been looking forward to this gathering on water research in South Asia, and made two adjustments in the title that I'm using here. The first is metropolitan rather than urban, and this follows directly from Afreen's last slide on the linkages between rural and urban. And the panel yesterday in the afternoon on urban, I think, really challenged the kind of distinction that's been made historically between urban and rural systems, and that metropolitan systems are going to be linking, or they already do link, urban and rural in manifold ways, and that's going to continue to be the case, and it'll be a mistake to focus on urban water systems separate from other both scales and immediate contexts of their regions. The second change that I've made is to add the United States, because I'm especially interested in comparative research in South Asia and the US, and over long periods of time. And so I'll try to make the case as to why I think that can be interesting and useful. And I should have mentioned that these two images, one from the riverbank of Lahore in the Ravi River on the left, and the other from Nala Bank in South Delhi, the Barapula Nala, are areas where we've worked. And you ask, what's the problem in these contexts? What are the problems and what are the possibilities? Another linkage between Afreen's talk just a moment ago is that if you go to the Ravi riverfront and ask who's living there in the settlements, Pathans, Baluch, and Sindhis, as well as Punjabis. It's like a small Pakistan in this. Now, it will sort differently once people are either move out or are displaced from the floodplain, which is currently threatened. And similarly in Delhi, people are being moved out of the Nala bank edges, and from a public health standpoint, that has a rationale, but the provision of water and wastewater connected locations is an issue. But it's not just that this is happening in countries of South Asia. I can show you similar settlements in Denver, Colorado, along the South Platte River on the left-hand side of the screen here. Three questions that, responding to Shafiq's challenge, that is one that's come up again and again already this morning. What's the problem? And how can one start to provide clearer answers? Afreen's suggestion of a diagnostic approach, I think, is a really good one. I'll also be asking, is historically based thinking obsolete? And Peter, this is a quote from a recent publication of yours. So I'm going to bring that into bear. And then, since I am part of a design program, I'll try to stress the ways that design can contribute more than it currently does to addressing complex water problems. So what's the problem? Having worked in both the US and South Asia, I think there's a progression of problem framing. And the narrative is on the left-hand side, and it's predictable as to how it unfolds. The image here is from Agra, and you see the Itamuddin tomb on the right, and in the distance there, that yellow pumping station water tank is the Agra Waterworks, and the Yamuna floodplain in between is depleted and terribly degraded. But the problem framings run something like this, and we've heard them this morning as well. Population growth is escalating, and that's leading to problems of water resource scarcity. But as Peter pointed out, this is a small proportion of water use overall. So you say, what's the problem? This can be solved. There's plenty of water for the urban population. But then they say, well, you know, some of the constraints are technological. The water's not available where it's needed or when it's needed. And in a monsoon climate, and we see the monsoon hydrographs or precipitation plots for Agra on the right-hand side, you see extraordinarily sharp seasonality and variability. And those are really serious parameters for water scarcity. But if technology is the problem, they say we can build storage. We can actually manage groundwater, build conveyance systems. The technologies are there to move water around however you would like. And not only that, we're on the verge of a technological revolution right now, which I think really should be put on the table with sensing systems. So whole new sensor systems for water quality and water measurement are being developed that are going to transform water resources management in the next generation. But the technology, people say, it'll come at a cost. There'll be a financial cost, but there'll also be environmental costs, there'll be social costs. Think of the river interlinking projects proposed for India. Huge costs involved, but the economist said, we have methods for estimating these costs. We can help you. You know, we can help solve it. We can even tell you the optimal solution if you'd like to hear it. They said, but you will have to deal with certain problems of management, whereby the water isn't managed optimally at all, not close. And so the management revolution occurred in the late 20th century, 2 decades or so of research focused on water management. A lot of the most innovative work in South Asia, from which we have yet to draw adequately in the US. And this has led to, this is just one database, it's the benchmarking network for cities around the world. And I just aggregated the cities by country on the columns, but there are 84 South Asian cities out of 2,000 cities worldwide, and of the the dozen or so variables on the left, that's out of 70+ variables for comparative urban water management, both research and operations, and cities are using these tools and developing them. So the management people are saying, we're coming along and we're providing some insights. It's, but you've got a problem with your water lawyers. The water lawyers are the problem. And we had this discussion just a week ago. You see, if the water lawyers get involved, you'll spend, n amount of time on the definition of the terms. And your transaction costs will go through the roof, and so on and so forth. And the lawyers respond correctly. We solve problems. We have all kinds of language. We've got whole bodies of case law and precedents that actually are tools for solving problems. And the water law has enormous space for creative action. The problem is actually the politics. Politics is the problem. And, but that's where in the past decade, and we'll hear, I think, from Farhana a lot more about the politics of water, that this is I'd say the most active field of research and social research on water in the past decade. And it's gotten to a very sophisticated level where the politics of water is now not something that one says reluctantly, there's politics. Let's try and engineer our way around it. But instead, study it directly, like any other dimension of a problem. So political research on water is really quite advanced and has a lot more to contribute than it has in past periods. But the cultural dimensions of water, I think, are perhaps a very interesting field that's cultural research is somewhat pursued separately from research on, I'm going to call it water resources management. And there's brilliant work in South Asia. I'm thinking of things on the Ganga and Yamuna, especially anthropological studies of purity and pollution that really can help understand problems. And by definitions of culture of a half century ago, they included all of the above in this list of problem framings. And so there are a variety of integrative approaches. IWRM is one of them that's come along internationally. It's been criticized to some extent, but it's an advance over what happened before. Political ecology, mentioned yesterday, a lot of promise, and maybe in discussion we can pick up some of these that are new integrative approaches that might be interesting or valuable. The sociohydrology is a new subfield developing. Cultural is not yet on the map. I think it's something that research in South Asia can really contribute because there's a blindness in the U.S. to it, and I'll try to indicate how we can even start to remove that blindness as well. But we'll need these types of research, all of them, not one versus another, but all of them. The point of this review is that there's a narrative progression. You hear it again and again and again in just this sequence. And so if you just, instead of posing one against the other, look for linkages among them, they have a better shot at dealing what's coming down the line. Take a look at Agra, what their development plans are for the city of Agra. Here's what's coming. Ring roads, international airport, convention center, this is the city of the Taj Mahal, mass transit, an amusement park, a barrage across the river, and oh yes, an ecological wastewater treatment plant. It is a circus of proposals. And if you don't have all of those ways of problem definition under command, the city of Agra may be in trouble. Second, so this is where I think the historical type of work really matters. It's historically based thinking obsolete. And I think Peter had a good reason for this on the ADB Briefs article, to say, you know, some of the historically based ways of thinking are obsolete and they won't solve problems, as we've said. But other types of historical inquiry into how water systems have developed and why they are the way they are, how there's a rediscovery of past practices. I'm thinking Center of Science and Environment's rainwater harvesting, which was far ahead of any rainwater harvesting programs in any other part of the world that I'm familiar with. So I said, well, let me just dig into this a little bit. And the cities that I'm particularly interested in or know closest are the Mughal cities, and say, well, gosh, it's pretty interesting. But as I think about it, the Mughal urban water systems were architecturally sophisticated, but they were technologically pretty simple. Much better were the Sultanate systems. So go back a couple of centuries to the Sultanate period, Delhi Sultanate, Firoz Shah Tughlaq, you had far better multi-scale types of water systems. But at the end of the day, or at the end of each century, you found that, look how many cities there are in Delhi, 7 to 17, depending on how you count them, of urban development collapse, new city, and so that leads us to think that the cities that are kind of being projected along the lines that Peter had mentioned are not going to be the cities of the future. And even one has to consider the possibility that there will be deurbanization in some regions, even in South Asia. The area that we're working in presently in our workshop in Gujarat and Jamnagar district is adjacent to Harappan post-urban sites. So after Indus civilization had de-urbanized, there were still some sites being developed, but that process of urbanization failed, and others have also in the U.S. Major processes of deurbanization. It's not impossible that this could happen. So these discontinuities have to be kind of anticipated, and it's difficult sometimes for engineering models to incorporate structural discontinuities of this sort. There are continuities between the U.S. and South Asia. I'd like to just touch on very briefly a favorite one from just west of our own town here, where you have Thoreau, writing about the ice cutting on the surface of Walden Pond and thinking about how the water of his immediate environs there would go to Madras and Calcutta as ice for beverages to cool people's drinks, but also to kind of be linked with, mingle what he said with the waters of the Ganga. And he was reading the Gita and Sufi poetry as he's thinking very, very intensely at a local scale. It's an extraordinary example of small waters with monumental cultural significance. And it wasn't lost on Gandhi, who read Thoreau, perhaps a little bit on the banks of the Sabarmati that we talked about yesterday. I don't know, this is the ashram on the right-hand side today. And it wasn't just a simple kind of continuities here. There were extremely passionate and debates and disagreements, so that we had another U.S. South Asia connection between Dr. Ambedkar with one of his professors, John Dewey, who argued with Gandhi quite strongly. But look at Dewey's laboratory school for for the types of city building, watershed modeling, and women's architecture that were being conducted on the Chicago Midway in the early 20th century. They were way ahead. This historically based ways of thinking, or rather these historic ways of thinking, have a lot of relevance, I think, today. So what is the problem? Integrative approaches, I think all of the above, and there's a special role that design has to play. I'll just mention that there's two types of design that are on my mind. One is water conserving design. Question was raised yesterday about livelihoods research. And the conservation of livelihoods along with water assets and water resources management and experience are all key, and we've looked at some of these relationships in Rajasthan cities. But more perhaps of complementary, at least as important, maybe more so, definitely more so than excellence in design, is excellence in design support. And this is where we see the work of the Orangi Pilot Project and Dr. Hamid Khan in Orangi providing support for people to do what they wanted to do when the state and larger societies were not there to help. That support model was actually developed in Comilla in Bangladesh initially. It had another set of strong analogs in the Aga Khan rural support programs in northern Pakistan. And you take a look at these built environments, and they're exquisite in every sense of the term, as well as in their water management. What's interesting is that they were rural development models brought into the city. So this is, again, an argument for how to link rural and urban systems and water conserving design with support for people doing what they want to do. In our own case, in our program, sometimes students say, oh, we're in a program of NALA research and design. All we do is NALAs. And so that's not always the nicest topic, but it's actually fascinating and has of huge significance for urbanizing areas. As the water quality and wastewater situation has been mentioned a couple of times, it's just worsening in many contexts. In some villages, like on the left-hand side here where we're working this semester, it's actually in a pretty good situation compared with the Delhi Nala in the middle, or the River Ravi in Lahore, which is the next project that we'll be doing next year. So if you ask what kind of research agenda I'd like to suggest by way of conclusion, it would be a collaborative cultural research on water in South Asia and the United States. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Jim, for raising a very interesting question. Is historically based thinking obsolete? And I like this because at least two of our panel members are on the same page. So in this context, I also like another quote by Einstein. He said, the problem that we created at the level of conception cannot be solved by the same level of conception, meaning that the problem that we have created for the last 50 years, it simply cannot be solved by the way we think about it. But that doesn't mean that we cannot learn from the past. I think I do like Afreen's suggestion that if you ask me broadly, we have been thinking about these problems as linear problems, that we have some type of cause-effect relationship. We know what the interventions are, and I can find out a system and design it and get it done. I can find out an optimal solution. That is the predominant paradigm. What she showed in her last slide, that may not work really. There are new tools coming out, this network analysis, these ideas of complexity, ideas of emergent behavior. Maybe that's what we need to focus on. So with that, our last panel speaker is Farhana Sultana. She comes from a very interesting background. She has a geoscience bachelor's from Princeton, then moved into political ecology, geography, and now she also has a book called Right to Water, Politics, Governance, and Social Struggle. So she has a very wide range of experience from really going from pure science to social science to geography and looking at a scale very differently. She has worked extensively in Dhaka in a slum, so she will now bring us from really from the SAARC scale to the slum scale. It's all yours.
Does this work? Is this all right? Okay, great, thank you. Thank you, Shafiq, for inviting me to present, and it's really nice to go last. It means that I can hopefully try to tie in, but I'm not entirely sure. So what I'm going to be talking to you about is looking at urban water crisis, but from the perspective of informal settlements and the urban poor. And I'm not entirely sure if this is very visible. I just realized there's a lot of glare coming through the window, and I don't know if we need to close a curtain or switch off a light. So I can't see the slide at all from where I'm sitting.
Yeah, that'll be good.
Is that better?
Yeah, this is better.
Okay, all right. I'll go ahead and get started. So I want to pick up on something that we talked about yesterday in the urban session. We talked about issues around urban fractures, urban fragmentations, and urban frictions. And the areas that I focus on are these places called slums or informal settlements. Now, the issue about slums is that, urban slums make up about 35% of the urban population and sometimes even higher, and they're increasingly growing. And these are people who are displaced from other places, whether it's because of an agrarian crisis or as Sir Abid mentioned, perhaps from climate change. It could be from a range of issues. These are the desperate poor who are coming to the city to eke out a livelihood. And yet, they're often really not desired, right? So they live in very poor and insecure infrastructure on public and private land, in shacks. They're constantly under threat of removal and demolition and erasure. They're unwanted denizens. The middle class and the wealthy do not really want to look out their window and see what you're seeing here, although unfortunately the picture's not very bright. But basically a lot of tin shacks, tin roofs, thatched huts. They're often considered an urban blight. And as a result, they're not seen as full citizens, not full citizens or full urban dwellers. However, these urban poor perform a very important role in the urban economy, both informally and formally, and we talked about that yesterday, and I believe we'll be addressing some of these issues later today. Despite their role economically and socially, they don't really have a lot of rights or power in the governance of the city. They're often called upon during vote time, because they're voter banks, but they're not really powerful or have a say in how the city is managed, and as a result, how city's municipality is managed. So what I want to talk about is these fractured or fragmented water provisions. So you can think of them as spaces that don't have infrastructure, right? They're infrastructure-less spaces. Now, what's important that Shafiq alluded to earlier when he referenced my talk is that water supply in many cities is linked to property rights. You must have a legal address for a water bill to be sent to for you to have access to being on the grid, being on the energy grid or being on the water grid. So as a result, people who are squatters, who are living in slums and constantly being erased, moved around, demolished, they don't really have permanent addresses, and therefore they cannot make those kinds of claims as urban dwellers to municipal supplies. So therefore the water crisis is most keenly and most acutely felt by the urban poor living in urban slums. And this lack of formal water system, as a result, leads to the creative, perhaps we may consider it as a generative production of alternative ways of getting water. It could be the water mafia. People figure out how to access water illegally, or purchase water, or they barter for water, or open themselves up to exploitation in order to get water. Because at the end of the day, water is the one non-substitutable biological thing we need to survive as human beings. You can't drink oil. So without water, you don't survive. You may survive for a few days, but no longer. So it is the one thing that all of us, whether we're poor, wealthy, first world, or third world, have in common, the need for water for our very own biological reproduction. So I'm going to give you just a quick example of a case study that I've been working on for a few years. It's based in the largest slum in Dhaka, the capital of Bangladesh. And as you can see in the pictures on the top right, it's an aerial picture. It's actually taken from the top of the BRAC building, where Sir Abid's office is housed, in the big NGO known as BRAC. And the slum has been growing on the lake, on this lake called Gulshan Lake. And as you can see in the photo on the bottom left and on the bottom right, both the rich and the poor are building onto the lake. You see the yellow building with the red roof. And yet it's the poor who are being maligned for taking over the lake. So that's so from the top, the wealthy are seeing down at the growth of the shanty, and from the slum, people are looking up to the high-rises in whose shadows they live. Just very quick context, it's about 100,000 people, over 90 acres of land. Their monthly incomes vary from $50 to maybe up to $150 if they're slightly wealthy by slum comparison. And they may spend up to $11 to $15 a month for water connections, usually through these illegal water vendors. There's 54 water vendors that operate, and what they basically do is they tap into the municipal water supply and resell it to the poor. If you want to get a sense of how expensive it is, it's quite astronomical. They're paying almost 1,000 times more per liter than the subsidized government municipal rate. So I'm going to go fairly quickly through just this case study before I move on to kind of what I see as the key challenges. And I'm drawing from two publications. Shafiq mentioned the book that came out recently. It's called The Right to Water, and also another publication called Gender Justice and Public Water for All that I co-authored with my colleague Chandra Mohanty at Syracuse University and one of our grad students. And this is also part of an ongoing set of publications that will be coming out shortly. So when we think about materializing water access for the very poor, who are not wanted, who are not supplied legally, they're creative. They come out with informal and legal systems. However, these systems are unsafe, right? There's a lot of cross-contamination. The systems are insecure, as you can see from the photo on the bottom right. Government officials will routinely come and pull away these pipes that have been installed to legally tap into the grid. And as a result, the system's also very unreliable because you never really know when you're going to get water, and it's expensive, as I mentioned. At the same time, people make community, people make livelihoods, and these are people who have come to the city to work in the garments factories. Yesterday was the 1-year anniversary of the Rana Plaza collapse. So often the people living in the slums are, the feminized labor force. They're the rickshaw pullers, the drivers, the sweepers, the cleaners, the domestic maids. So they may have access to water where they work, but they don't necessarily have access to water where they live. So they come up with ways to survive by having very insecure water sources that come at random times in the day and often make them ill because it's not very clean. As you can see, it's coming through the lake, right? And it's PVC pipes. And another aspect that I want to highlight that Jim alluded to, that we're not doing a very good cultural analysis, I'd call this social and cultural analysis, in that water is a gender issue. Because it's largely the women, the mothers, daughters, grandmothers, wives, who are responsible for domestic water management. They will have to figure out how to get water for the home, for cooking and cleaning and bathing and drinking. And often they may not be able to go to work because they have to wait around, or if they go to work, then the child's future is sacrificed because then the eldest child may have to stay and wait to see when the water may come on or where they can get water from. So in the bottom two photos, this is a mother I worked with. She's so poor she cannot even access one of the 54 illegal water vendors or water mafia. So what she's doing is availing water from one of the illegal pipes which have been illegally cut by somebody else. So she's fetching water in little pots. So what we see is that there is a gender difference even within a population that's under dire stress for water, and that has other social and socioeconomic consequences. A second issue that I want to highlight is that water is a class issue, in the sense that we have to think about intersectionalities and differences amongst the poor and amongst the wealthy. So in the bottom photos, if you can see on the bottom left, is emergency water supply. It's being doled out by the Army. This Army officer looks particularly distressed. And women on the bottom right are marching on the streets because the middle class and the wealthy are bill-paying customers of the water municipality. Therefore, they have a right to claim a supply or a service that is not adequately provided. But the squatters in the slums cannot make such claims. They can queue for water, they can wait, but there's really a difference in how the different groups of people, the wealthy versus the middle class versus the poor, can access water. So I think this is really important when we think about urban water systems. And linked to that is a broader issue about urban water governance. That when we think about water in cities, it's not just about provision of water in cities, but it's provision for who, right? So we have to address those sticky topics like equity and social justice, not just the city that is the visible, the city that is ready for capital. No, but the city that is invisibilized or demolished or unwanted. And this links back to issues of like, well, how are we managing water in the city? So the photo on the bottom left is one of many that I have of how wetlands in the urban area are increasingly being filled for high rises. So if you're going to replenish the groundwater, you have to have wetlands and water drainage, right? But you just can't continually grow as a city. And on the photo on the top left is from India, and you can see the wealthy apartment that's rising right next to the slums with its own swimming pool and tennis courts and so on. And on the bottom right is a picture of the very same wealthy people who are stuck in floods because the city can't drain water. It's become so concretized. So when we think about water availability, we have to think about the city as a whole, but we also have to think about water for who and at what time and where. So what I want to raise are a few issues. I realize I've gone very quickly through the case study, and I'm happy to answer questions afterwards. There's a lot of detail there. But I want to raise some of the issues that Shafiq wanted us to consider. So if we want to think about water for slums, the very poorest, right? The issues that we really need to think about is that people come up with ad hoc solutions. They manage, right? Everyone manages because you cannot do without water. However, at the same time, it opens up the formal water system to corruption and exploitation. And this is something a lot of water municipalities are worried about. When illegal connections are made, it becomes a point of contamination that contaminates the whole grid. And it's also a source of revenue loss, right? Huge amounts of water that is not being paid for, but some bill collector at the lower level is making some deal with some water vendor and making money there. So it's money, it's a revenue loss, and it's a system loss. So when we think about water for slums, we need to also therefore think about how we need to conceptualize and then enact affordable water. And not just affordable, but reliable. Because this is what the poor really want. They want affordable and reliable public services. They want to be on the grid and receive the same subsidized water that the wealthy do. And as a result, what I found through my work is that the poor, as well as the United Nations, are mobilizing very similar discourses of the right to water. But the poor are talking about in terms of the right to life and citizenship. That this is being able to live depends on being able to consume clean water. So the UN's right to water, in terms of its goals and criteria, and I won't go into it a lot, but I just want to highlight to you, is that it really stresses issues of quantity, quality, reliability, affordability, accessibility, acceptability, accountability, sustainability, non-discrimination, and participation. Yes, these are big, fuzzy words. They're buzzwords often, but they're not meant to be prescriptive, and every member state that signed on to this in 2010, when the UN ratified the human right to water, is that it should be contextualized and decided upon. So what I found in my work is that this discourse of the right to water does real work. It does discursive work, and it does real work in the sense that it foregrounds, it gives poor people a right to have a voice, or rather make claims on the state, and highlight the uneven and inequitable way that water access is distributed throughout the city, and that somebody needs to address these urban inequities, these inequities that are built into the fabric of the city. And this discourse also enables the poor to contest issues around citizenship, because they're often seen as quasi-citizens, and then raise other issues around democracy and social justice. As a result, it's seen as claims making by the poor. So it's not just about water access, right? It's about water governance. So what I find really interesting is this cross-scale mobilization of this term. But in order for this to happen, what needs to happen first? We have to first recognize that urban poor's human right to water, right? Not just some generic conceptual abstract notion of the human right to water, but the people who actually really need it. And then we need to ensure the state's obligations to respect, protect, and fulfill that right. And Bangladesh is one of the signatories to the UN right to water. The US is not, no surprise there. And then you need to mobilize stakeholders and actors, right? Who's involved? Is it NGO like DSK that I work with that Shafiq referenced, or other stakeholders, community-based organizations, CBOs, different kinds of levels, whether it's activists or scholars. So let me conclude with what I think are possible outcomes and solutions that we can think about when we think about if a system is only as strong as its weakest members, and if the slum dwellers are the weakest members of the city system, then what are the ways we can think about how to resolve water crises in cities? So I think what's really important is that we need to democratize water governance, and we need to enable this right to water. And what this means is in thinking of the poor as citizens, not as quasi-citizens, Understanding that their voice and opinions matter, and it's really important to take those into account. And specifically, inclusion of women's participation, because it is, at the end of the day, a very gendered burden when you don't have water for your household. And as a result, we need to also therefore think about issues of power and power relations and politics and political capture, how some people can want to even speak on behalf of the poor. A second thing that I think is really important is the possible ways to proceed for water justice. So I would argue that we need to de-link property rights to right to water, because if it's only if you have land and tenural rights, then slums are never going to get water. A second way to do this is to configure mediators that can act as guarantors, whether it's an NGO or a CBO, some way to facilitate an existing legal or managerial structure that may be resistant to change. And then we need to really ensure equitable pricing and subsidies. You can have cross subsidies where the rich pay a little bit more, the poor pay a little less, and this happened in many countries quite successfully. And at the same time, we need to also watch out for a huge push by various corporations and donors for privatization of water institutions and commodification of water, because that will really price the poor out of the market, and we saw that in Cochabamba and Bolivia during the water wars over a decade ago. A third thing would be to improve urban planning that includes housing and water for the urban poor. We're not really seeing that very well in South Asian cities. And we have to recognize that some slum-scale solutions require city-wide action, city-scale planning, but also national vision of inclusiveness, of not constantly denigrating the poor. And another aspect I think that's really important is to foster cross-class alliance, because it is the wealthy who often fear that they're going to run out of water, right? So we have to figure out how to change the attitudes, encourage that cross-class alliance, and tell them do it either out of philanthropy or out of self-interest. You want a healthy urban population. You don't want those public health outbreaks and of diarrhea and cholera and so on. And this is kind of the last point, second to last point, is that we need to recognize these urban water issues are that complex interplay of nature and society that Jim alluded to and that I mentioned yesterday, and taking that political ecological analysis so that we have to recognize the cross-scalar issue and then also the multidisciplinarity of it all. So what would be a measurable outcome of success for me? It would be safe water for people in the slums. And it would be a robust water system that fulfills a range of criteria that is contextually appropriate and fairly negotiated and not completely just top-down imposed. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Farhana. I think we have managed to basically put everything on schedule. So we have 45 minutes that we will open up for interactive conversation with you. I just want to make two observations. First is this idea of water as an object and water as a resource. I think it has come through really in all four discussion. When you look at water as an object, that is the way water has been used. So it's an engineering object. I can essentially control it and I can use it for my own purpose, from building dams to building a very sophisticated water treatment plant. If you take even the single most engineering innovation that has impacted more lives, this is really water treatment. Access to safe water really has saved millions of lives. So that's a tremendous engineering success. But that is water used as an object. Now when you talk about water really as whether it's a property or it's a right, that's very different. And water also is very strange in the sense that when it evaporates really from the ocean, it is a public good. Then it rains, it is still a public good. When it rains to Quaban Reservoir, it's still a public good. When it comes through the pipes to my home, it becomes a property because I bought it. And then I use it, I abuse it, then I discharge it. Then again it becomes a public good and it goes to Boston's harbor really. Somebody has to treat it. So as a result really water changes its character even when it flows through the hydrologic cycle. We need to recognize those complexities when we start suggesting solutions. So with that, really, I'll open it up for the audience to ask questions. So please identify yourself and ask a question which is directed towards any particular panel member.
Can we do some of these handheld
Sure,
mics?
sure. Let's do that.
Turn on the lights.
And then when we make comments, can we share that over mic?
Sure. Okay. So let's use that one for the comments. Yeah.
When we make the comments.
Yeah. So this one. I think so. I think we'll start Scott. So how do we?
Thank you. And thanks to you all for an incredibly rich set of perspectives. My name is Scott. Name is Scott Moore. I'm a postdoctoral research fellow next door at the Kennedy School, focused on water resource issues mainly in China. So this is very enriching to get something of a comparative perspective with South Asia. I wanted to pick up on a point that Farhana, you made in your last slide about privatization, and I think the well-founded kind of caution about that. But I wanted to just sort of dig a little deeper into that, because I think that globally, that's really kind of one of the core issues in urban water supply is, I think it's fair to say that just pragmatically, expanding urban water supply systems are going to require some substantial degree of private investment. And I guess the question would be, thinking particularly across scales, I wonder if there are kind of a set of kind of best practices, models, or sort of safeguards that might point toward a way to handle, maybe public-private partnerships or privatization strategies in a way that at least tries to address or minimize the potential negative aspects on access and the distributional issues. Thanks.
Thank you. Can everyone hear me? Yes? All right. So the debate around privatization is quite complex and very contentious, right? There are people who are very pro, people who are very anti, and people who are kind of in between. I think with the question you asked, that with growing cities, right, with expanding cities, what do we do? Well, instead of saying that the state has failed or the municipality has failed and we need a private actor, why don't we figure out better financial management and better resource management, or change the entity that you think is inefficient or inept, and have them do it better? So I think some of this is through public-private partnerships. Some of it is called remunicipalization. Some of it is called public-public partnerships. Because at the end of the day, when a private entity withdraws because it's no longer profitable, who's left to clean up the mess? It's usually the public sector. So I think my personal opinion is, why don't we figure out how to bolster and strengthen the public sector? Because it is more accountable to its citizens than a foreign corporation that has the ability to just leave when it wants to. And so then we can think about expansion and better provision without necessarily privatizing or commodifying water. I'm not entirely sure if that answers your question, but I think I'm of the opinion that we need to figure out how to do things better than constantly think that privatization is the only solution, because I don't think it's the only solution. And it's been proven to be a solution that's been quite detrimental to the urban poor globally across cities.
Thank you very much. My name is Hasna Maudud. I'm a visiting fellow at Ash Center Kennedy School. I'm very impressed with the presentations, very high quality. We have gone a long way from being water experts into really, truly water experts of global. I would like to focus on how we can learn from other slums, other countries. For example, in Rio de Janeiro, they have slum tours, how they have managed it so well. And I have observed in other places in Rio de Janeiro, in Brazil. We can learn from them. The only thing is they have right to the slum areas, whereas I know in Dhaka there are slums, but at the same time we have people living on the street at night. So they even don't have a right to stay in one place. Then I want to also draw on the fact that we have all signed, the countries have signed Millennium Goals, and there is a competition among SAARC countries, how we are achieving sanitation as well as water access, etc. And while we are at it, why not bring how much focus there is on urban achievement, on urban sanitation and water use, because that has not been attempted. There is a big push for countries' water and sanitation success, but not so much on cities that are very vulnerable. And also political will is very important. I think democracy or democratization may be the equalizer And political parties, they have their manifestos. They must now come with absolutely their views and their policies on water. Particularly, the slums are also under political constituencies, and they are also answerable to the person who is elected by the slum dwellers. So there we can also bring some accountability that you will have to address the water issue of the settled slums. I also want to point at the regional cooperation in water scarcity in downstream, as well as lower riparian of common rivers, particularly in South Asia, how we can address and have regional cooperation in equity in water. Thank you.
So who wants to pick that on? Maybe I think, okay, so fine, go ahead. So we'll take maybe 2 more questions and then we'll ask the panel member to respond.
Hello, my name is Smita. I'm a city planning candidate at MIT. My question is for Afreen. I know you talked about trust being one of the biggest issues, but your presentation didn't further elaborate on what are the kind of strategies that you would think to build trust that you would follow at a provincial scale. And the other issue, question connected to that is, I was wondering what you have found, what are the impacts of kind of regional infrastructures in water management which have caused the trust deficit? Are there some issues which interlink those large-scale regional infrastructures and that lead to the trust deficit?
So next question is here.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Sharmila Murthy. I'm an assistant professor at Suffolk Law School and a visiting scholar at the Kennedy School. Fantastic panel, so I congratulate you all on just bringing us through scale. So one thing that I've been thinking a lot about in writing about the right to water in slums in India is thinking about how do you operationalize that and really getting, so one of the things that really struck me about these presentations was scale. And coming at this from a legal perspective, I think about this in terms of federal countries, Pakistan, India, and I have really come up with the challenge of trying to think about how do you actually follow the money and have the institutional structures in place such that, for example, in India, there's various, a lot of power is supposed to be happening to the states. All around the world, there's this trend towards decentralization, but most of the financing is at the federal level. So I have kind of come up with all of a sudden trying to become an expert on fiscal federalism to understand how do you actually operationalize some of these questions. So I would love some reflections on that.
I've been handed the mic, so I'm in the hot seat. So I will pick up on Smita's question, and I think there are other experts who are better positioned to address your comments, so we will get to that. So the question of strategies for building trust, I will be the first person to say that I don't know. I think that's the beauty for water when we deal with it, that you are very easily able to identify that it's somebody else's problem, and I will be definitely, quick to say that this is something that an expert social scientist, I think, is much more qualified to comment on that. This is really not my area of expertise, but I do see that as a critical issue that needs to be dealt with. That's the extent to which I will leave it at. Now, the question about, just coming back to the trust question, though, technology has been used to try to address it from an engineering perspective, and I was mentioning the telemetry system in which there's this notion that if there's greater transparency, there will be more trust. But that has not worked in the case of Pakistan. The system has been manipulated, the people don't trust the measurements, so then now what do you do? So you come back to the same question. The second question you raised of the interregional water management infrastructure and what impact that may have had. That's actually very interesting that you raised that, because actually the roots of some of that water management infrastructure lead us back to the trust question. meaning that in the case of the Indus Basin, there was an agreement between Punjab and Sindh in 1945, which was sharing the waters of the Indus. That was before the large-scale infrastructure development took place in Western Pakistan. So this agreement predated the existence of the country in 1945, and it had come after a long, period of accusations and fights between the Upper Riparian Province and the Lower Riparian Province. In 1947, that changed when the new state was created. And then there were tensions, between India and Pakistan on water sharing, which led to the 1960 Indus Water Treaty. What that treaty did was to essentially enable both countries to develop a lot more infrastructure, large dams. And it is widely believed, if you read the literature, the Sindhis say that basically the Punjabis, agreed away all the waters that Sindh was to get through that treaty to India. So essentially, you can link that back to some of the suspicions and accusations between the provinces to the Indus Water Treaty, which allowed for creating different large-scale water infrastructure. And that sowed the seeds for greater mistrust between the provinces that we still deal with. So actually, all of these are very interconnected, at least in the case of Pakistan that I've studied. So how do we solve that problem? I think it definitely leads back to the question of building greater ties between the provinces. There's actually growing diversion rather than cohesion between the two. And this federal fiscal question, Sharmila, I think that really comes to the heart of the issues, at least in Pakistan, where they've actually devolved more and more power to the provinces and also the finances, which basically means that now some provinces have a lot of money, some have little, and not enough capacity to make efficient use of that money. So it's a very tricky question, complex question. That's what I will say. Who else would want to comment?
Let the panel member decide who wants to pick on the next one.
Okay.
Jim, you
Yes. Farhana wants to address the bigger question.
Just on fiscal federalism, I think it'll be interesting to see. JNNURM was an important case of funneling money straight down into the cities and ULB, so that they had more resources, but still the states really constrain what access cities have, and what comes next after the elections on JNNURM is an unknown. But that, and then there's other kind of corresponding community-based types of systems. I'm thinking of WASMO in Gujarat, which is a water and sanitation management organization that's community-based and community-defined. But it's organized, unlike what Farhana was mentioning with respect to the Dhaka type situation, or even OPP, where people had to self-organize because they had no support except for NGO or CBO support. So it seems like there's some important experiments that if they were to be really drawn out and compared, that would be valuable. Yeah.
Sure. So a few issues are raised, and I agree that urban sanitation needs attention. And when you talk about urban water issues, it's never really delinked from sanitation because they come together. But I focus more on the aspect of water because that's become so critical in terms of people's everyday living and livelihood. But of course, I agree, sanitation is very, very important, increasingly so because so many people are living in cramped conditions. The issue around riparian countries and upstream, downstream sharing, I think it's really critical for South Asia because we don't have very good river management systems or treaties in place. And what's interesting is I've been in a number of workshops and conversations around water, and you hear people complain about China withdrawing water from the upper reaches of the Brahmaputra River and India literally Crimea River, and yet when Bangladesh is complaining about India blocking 52 of the rivers they share, not much conversation there. So we kind of see the upstream, downstream victim narrative changing. In terms of the other question, Sharmila's question about how to operationalize it, I tried to hit on a few of those. I don't have ideal solutions. If I did, I'd be God, right? But I think we need to think about institutional changes, and I think it comes back to those issues of, for me, what I think is really important is how do we enable people to have those kinds of spaces to have claims, and then have institutions respond to that. So it is about having cross-class alliance. It's about changing the municipal structure. If they need a guarantor, have a guarantor, figure out the money. There's no lack of money. We're building shiny, glossy malls in every South Asian city, right? We can surely figure out how to have formal, affordable water to up to 40% of the urban poor. But I think it's about will and politics. And how we change that, I think, needs to be contextually driven. But I don't think it's impossible. Sometimes people will collectivize, sometimes people will be creative. But I think what's really important is that we figure out how to do it formally and properly. So the poor people are not always the ones who are doing creative collectivizing, right? And solving their own problems. But there has to be some cross-scalers, cross-actor interest in that. And I think for me, that's really important. And when I said that problems in slums cannot be solved at the slum scale, it has to be about city planning and a national vision of water governance, but also about social justice.
Yes, I have one comment about the commodification of water. I mean, let's face it, water is a commodity. And I just filled a glass of water and I'm drinking it, which is a private good as far as I'm concerned. The issue of public or private provision of water services reminds me of Deng Xiaoping's The White Cat and the Black Cat. It doesn't matter how they're organized, it's can they catch the mice? And in fact, it's not at all given that public sector is better than private sector. One only has to go to New Delhi to see what a mess a beautiful public system, which could be done up the way the Philippines is done in Manila, for instance, which is working very well as a private thing. And so it's not at all clear to me that we should debate this anymore. I think the problem about the debate is it encourages bureaucracies like the ones in Delhi not to do anything about water supply. And they've got these people running around saying water should be free or it's not a commodity. And as a result, all the bureaucrats can sit safely in their jobs and continue to draw their salaries and sell water under the table, et cetera, et cetera. So I think we shouldn't, argue against commodification of water. It is a commodity.
Let me just make one observation here. So this is really not about black and white cat, and I like this. And this is exactly the point. Can it catch the mice? And this is exactly what it is. So how do you operationalize this? We have this here: is water a property or a right? This debate has been going on for too long. Whether it's a small n problem or large n problem from methodological research, these are questions we are not interested in. I'm just making it very blunt. We want to find out knowledge that can be operationalized with measurable outcomes. So that's where I think maybe our conversation should focus on. So please, go ahead and...
We've heard a number of scales, like from SAARC scale, I don't even know whether such scale exists, but and national scale to provincial scale and so on. Last evening we heard another scale from the BRAC talk, which is I think is a very different scale developing from the bottom. If you don't mind, if I may share a story kind of like very quickly. I do this field study in South Asia, and I took students to a self-built settlement in India, in Delhi, and there was this water issue in this settlement. And I had a very bright student from MIT who was leading this little team. She was able to kind of like make like 3 appointments with Delhi Development Authority, which I thought was amazing. And I told her at the end, you're not going to learn anything much from the Delhi Development Authority, because most of the stuff, how the government works, can be found in books and so on. Like it's very well known stuff. But you need to go to the settlement to ask how it operates. Why do they not have water? And where do they go if they don't have water? People are also agents. They also act. And then eventually, there were these rumors that there was an engineering problem. The water pipes cannot be kind of like pulled. All these things. Nevertheless, eventually, the day that my students made presentations to the National Institute of Urban Affairs, they got water. And in some ways, we didn't do anything. What really happened was kind of like there was a political issue. at the end. Like it was the people, when they don't have water, they go to the old Pradhan, and then the current Pradhan is kind of like sabotaging this, like, and because the old Pradhan belongs to the ruling party, and the current Pradhan doesn't want, like the old Pradhan to sort of like get water. So the issues could be like, this is where I think what I'm saying relates to BRAC, like, that type of story, like, is this really an issue of this scale that we're talking about? Because when you analyze a huge kind of like thing, and when you come down to trust is not of any of those scales. It's a social and also emotional and issue that's related to human agency, right? And I also wish to kind of like, I'm not making, I would like to kind of like make sense for myself. And Norman Uphoff, who also kind of like, of Cornell, who went to solve a water problem in Sri Lanka, he went with the idea that I will have solutions to this water problem. And he ended up learning from the people is the one who has to solve the problem. And then he wrote a huge book about what I learned rather than what I taught. So I'm just trying to kind of like figure this out. I don't know if anyone of you could enlighten me to kind of like connect this.
My name is it on? I'm Deepthi Nechawan I'm the Director of India Initiatives at Boston University and also an urban planner. We heard a lot about, water use in agriculture being the greatest use of water. And then I linked that to Afreen's slide of the tube well proliferation. And then linking that to Jim Wescoat's dying wisdom slide. The question is, of scale again. So we are talking about agriculture on a very large scale. But what can, are we saying that on an individual scale that there's not much one can do, or on a farmer scale, that if there is some intervention there, is that a starting point or is it not? You talked about rainwater harvesting being a very advanced system in rural India or in parts of desert Rajasthan a few decades ago. Is that still relevant? Should people be talking about that?
Hi, I'm Saurav. I'm in the Graduate School of Design doing a master's in landscape architecture. The presentations were mainly about surface water and about the supply side of surface water. I wanted to maybe get an idea of if the same principles apply or how it's special for issues of groundwater, which, unlike surface water, which you could be argued to be infinite, is not infinite because of the timescales involved and the way that it can be contaminated, and also the role of wastewater, which, again, after coming through our pipes, becomes public property, but becomes a public property that nobody wants, but affects water cycles in very dangerous ways. So I was wondering how whatever you talked about in terms of scale and principles apply to these two aspects of the water cycle.
Well, I think the issue about using where is the most water available is in agriculture. Now, it's not, agriculture isn't necessarily in the cities; it's outside of the cities, and but in many cases, the direct diversions of the surface water or the groundwater, they're both interconnected in most places. So what you see is there is an allocation problem between the use of water for agriculture and for urban settings. And that can be best handled either politically, if we can have some trust, if people agree to that, or it can be done on a market basis, if there are established water rights and they can trade between the various things. So it seems to me that it's not easy, but there are huge savings that are possible in irrigated agriculture. I worked with a farmer in Nebraska who has a 1,000-acre farm, and he reduced his water use by 2/3, doubled his crop yield by going to a new irrigation system, which is cheaper than the old traditional canal systems. And so there's an example now. That's a big farm. That's the trick in Asia, with 90% of the farms are 1 hectare and less in size. So how do you use the modern agricultural technology on the small scale things? And you need to do more work on leasing or cooperation or cooperatives or whatever. There are interesting things that can be done. Some countries like Malaysia are already moving to encouraging farm sizes to be increased. So they're encouraging people to leave the countryside and set up larger farms. They're looking for a 27-hectare size for the farm. And that is then an economical size which you can take advantage of all the modern agricultural technology. So doing that will save a lot of water for other uses.
I'll also add some comments. So I'm going to address 2 questions, or maybe 3 that were raised. One on what the farm level interventions can be regarding water, and then the politics being the problem. So at the farm level scale, at least in the case of Pakistan that I've studied, the problem is that, yes, water is used very inefficiently, but there is no incentive for the farmers to use it efficiently. I showed the energy cost and so forth. That's really recent phenomenon in the last 3-4 years, where the shortages are really kicking in, and we may very well see a change in behavior. But historically, the incentives just weren't there. There was a lot of water in the system. Farmers used flood irrigation in Pakistan, which is extremely inefficient. So if one really starts looking at the farm scale, drip irrigation, high efficiency irrigation application technologies, all of those are not being as widely used as they should be. And the question is why? Well, though these technologies require money, those who have money also have water. So there's no incentive. And those who don't have the water don't have the money, right? It's the small scale farmers who would probably very happily, use some of these efficient means, but they don't have the capital to employ and deploy these systems. So there's that question of the money question again, even at the farm level. So there's that mismatch. When large-scale farmers, they have all, the water they need, and they don't see the incentive of using it as efficiently. I think when the constraints really start to kick in, we will probably see a transition happening, even at the large farms in Pakistan, where water is more efficiently used. There's huge wastage. And then looking at the problem of politics, I think that's exactly that. It really, end of the day, boils down to the politics and the power structures that exist that I think dictate our water problem. And the question is, what to do. It goes all the way to the national assemblies, where at least in the case of Pakistan, the people control the land and the water are also controlling the politics and the power. These are all nested problems, and all that messy situation that I was showing you. That's exactly what we need to engage with. And what I want to just add to that messy problem is that Granovetter, who's a sociologist, wrote a very seminal paper on the strength of weak ties, in which he essentially talked about network theory, and he said that it may not be the most strong links or the connections that have the greatest or first order linkages that are important, but it's the weaker links that collectively may have the most impact. And that's what I'm interested in identifying. Where are the weak links that can be leveraged to bring around the bigger impact on the system? So that's my 2 cents.
Okay, for another 2 cents, just on the question of rainwater harvesting, there's a great scientific debate right now in India and elsewhere as to what rainwater harvesting can and can't accomplish in different contexts. And it's a wonderful set of issues as to how it's very successful in either being revived or sustained in some village contexts in Rajasthan. It's a mode of supplementary cistern types of water supplies in some cities. It works pretty well. If you ask, can you carry it over as storage to make a significant dent in urban water supply? The answer is got to be qualified and probably no. Same thing with drainage in cities, which is going to be a huge issue, along with, Sarav's mentioned groundwater, but drainage with the buildup or density of the city is going to be a massive problem. And the kinds of strategies that we see for drainage management that are small scale and decentralized will do part of the job, but they won't be fully adequate in major cities. But they will be meaningful as well as adequate for some problems. And I think that on the question of meaning, Nihal mentioned the work of Norm Uphoff. This learning from Galoya volume is not nearly as well known as it should be. Somebody who worked for decades in not just Sri Lanka, but throughout the region and other areas in irrigation management, was part of the management revolution. But he took away lessons that have a lot deeper significance, and learning from those, call it more autobiographical accounts of people. Dr. Akhtar Hamid Khan, he studied at Michigan State University, and that influenced what he did in Bangladesh and Pakistan. So these aspects of how learning travels around the world and over centuries rather than just yearly timescale seems important.
So since this is a messy problem, I want to at least shed light on two messiness of the problems. One is politics, another is trust. And it cannot be any more messy. So for politics, really what we are hoping to find really is what is going on in the policy literature right now. There has to be some multiple convergence of streams. What it means that first you need to identify the problem. That I think we have tried to do really. What is the problem? Once I have that, do I have some idea really what the solutions are? The third one is the most important one. That is the one, is it politically feasible? I may have the brilliant problem identification. I may even have the most brilliant solution. If the political situation is not right, it's not going to work. So let's admit that. I think that is very critical, because we may come up with all kinds of solutions really, and to give a very good example is what happened really with the Obamacare. In October it almost failed, and now over 7 million people signed up because Obama is seriously interested in this problem. So yes, this is basically a very remote example, but similar examples are also applicable for water. We need to find out what the solutions are. If you look at, for example, in California, right now, yes, I think we can find out all kinds of problems why California is getting problem. But at the same time, I can also say that, yeah, it is really mostly due to subsidy. The subsidy that we are using for different things. Is subsidy going to go away tomorrow? No. The subsidy will exist. And the question then is really, given that it exists, what else can be done, and what are those weak things that I can go and intervene? The second one is about trust. So trust, yeah, it is a very abstract concept. Everybody needs, even from relationship with your kid, to your spouse, to friends, and to water authorities. But that is still abstract. How do you make it operationalized? So I'll share an anecdotal example that happened last summer. We also have something called water diplomacy workshop. So there was an individual, I'll not tell the name because he told me not to. He shared it within the group. So he was from Israel. He is the guy who allocates water for Jordan River. Israel and Jordan signed the treaty in 1994 to store water for Jordan River in the dry season in Lake Tiberias. Lake Tiberias is in Israel. There is a sovereignty issue, but they didn't care about it. They said, no, it is not about sovereignty, it is I need water. During the dry season, you keep the water in the wet season, and in the dry season, give it back to Jordan. And that has been going on for last 20 years very well. Last year, because of this problem with Syria, now Jordan needs more water because there are more refugees. So in the summer, they needed about 2 million cubic meter of water. So this guy gets a call from his friend in Jordan, Israeli water guy. Can you give me 2 million cubic meter of water? And he is here really in the workshop. So he said, yes, I said yes, but with the condition that it should not be going to the newspaper. Because Israelis will not like that basically I am giving water to Jordan. So the reason he did it, because that is the way he built his lifetime trust with the Jordanian guy. This is exactly what has to happen. This has to happen at an informal level. Informal level where over time you develop those trust. And that trust,
only that is the way it can be done. Otherwise, if you do it on a governmental level, on a basically giving speeches and doing a media campaign, it's not going to work. So ultimately, this is all about relationships and how you build those relationships over time. That is the way to build trust. So we'll get the question from Ali here. I think he's been waiting for quite some time.
Oh, thank you. My question is for Dr. Rogers, actually. Dr. Rogers, you showed some slides on the South Asian and Southeast Asian megacities, the projected water demands. And some of them, like from 2010 to 2025, in 15 years, their expected demands are almost doubling. So my question is, like in engineering terms, this is a tremendous amount of capacity that needs to be developed in 15 years. That's almost impossible in terms of sourcing that water, distributing that water, financing those projects. So is there at all an engineering solution to these problems? And also, even if we employ water conservation and other methods of building trust and more water cooperation, if these type of growth trends continue, is it at all possible to meet these demands, or are we going to be always in water crisis mode? I wanted to draw your experience in dealing with lots of cities from other parts of the world. Thank you.
One more question, I think, then we will end, because I was told that we only have 5 minutes, so 3 minutes. So if there are, okay, please.
My name is Roop Sani. I'm a postdoc at UConn in the Department of Civil and Environmental Engineering. My question is for Farhana. Farhana, I'm so sorry. Farhana. So I was just wondering, so let's say by some miracle tomorrow the government says let's supply water to the slum areas. Wouldn't that cause additional problem for the development of slum areas? You know, like people are further gonna move into slum areas now that the government is supplying water. Number two, how about having hand pumps as a source of water supply in slum areas? I don't know if that's feasible or not, but I was just thinking if that's an alternative to having water for slum people, you know. Yeah, thank you.
All right. So let's start with Peter, I think.
Well, the question was about how could the demand for water double over a 15-year period. And that's pretty easy, because most of those cities already less than 50% of the population is being served. And if you're going to serve all of the population in 15 years' time, you have to include the people who are not being served right now and the growth of those cities in the future. So that's where those numbers come from. But while I have the microphone, I'd like to make a comment on trust. Trust, it sounds nice, you know, everybody says it's a good thing to have. We all sit around the campfire and sing Kumbaya or something like that. I'm a great believer in log rolling. And log rolling, that's political horse trading. And that's the way politics ought to work, I think. It doesn't work if we focus on a single issue. So if we focus on water, there's very little to negotiate away about water. But if we throw in everything else, things, then there's something in it for everybody, and you can log roll nicely. I think this is the way the U.S. Congress used to work, and now it doesn't work that way because of ideologies getting in the way of it. It's considered immoral to do that. But I think I would never count on trust as getting us anywhere. I think we really need to get back to the serious politics of trading things.
So the question about what would happen if we started to provide water for slums, well, you've actually tapped onto the biggest class anxiety of the permanence of slums. That if we give them water, they'll never leave, right? That's the number one comment that I've heard from all my years of fieldwork. But again, it goes back to issues of like, you know, whose land are they on? Do they have a right to be in the city? So it goes back to, you know, a very, you know, the big debates around the right to the city, whether you take on Henri Lefebvre or David Harvey or whoever. But the issue about, you know, what it really means to have water, it comes down to not only the permanence of the slum, but on everyday survival, right? because there are hand tube wells, right? They're hand wells. So the slums in certain parts of the world that have it, have that access to water. Maybe they're fighting for something else. They're fighting for housing and recognition. But the slums that don't have any water at all, that becomes far more important than worrying about whether they're going to be here next day, because bulldozers are always around the corner, but water is needed every day. But I think the issue is exactly what I was talking about in terms of why we don't see cross-class alliance. It's because of that anxiety that the poor will grow and they will take over and it will be a pretty lake or a pretty park anymore, because those, slum shanties will just keep expanding.
That's a part of the problem. The government is not supplying water or not agreeing to.
It's context driven. So in some cases, in one instance that I've worked in, it was a problem because the wealthy neighbor would have to share, basically share their pumping station, and the question, the concern was, are we going to mine the groundwater even further? Are we going to run out of water? So there was that class anxiety that got in the way of the municipality wanting to formalize, not necessarily legalize, but formalize the water connections, because they're losing revenue, right? And they're contaminating the grid. So they would like to earn the revenue and formalize a system that already exists rather than all those water vendors. But in this particular instance, the wealthy neighborhood got in the way. In other instances, it's a whole bunch of things. It's either law or this formal, informal, legal, illegal, that whole set of debates that comes up in, in urban studies literature. But I think, who are the people in the government in positions of power? The people who are wealthy. And water is power, and power rules everything.
Can I just make one minor comment?
All right, sir.
So I love your thought, Peter, that we need to engage in serious politics regarding water. And just to sort of go, take that further, I think this issue of linking water with energy and food can allow for that, actually. As you were saying, that just solving the water problem alone may not allow for sufficient politics or sufficient number of winners. But if you expand that water bucket or pie or whatever unit you want to call it, then we may find some interesting solutions, I think, that are politically feasible to many parties.
This is wonderful. So this almost, I think I didn't plan it, but Afreen basically gave me the last word. I think so. Let me, because we're almost out of time. So trust or politics. So trust really is not a noun. It also be a verb, and the way you make it a verb or an actionable is by bringing in the politics. What that means essentially is that we just simply cannot talk about this unless we can operationalize this. So how do I do this? The way to do this would be to essentially understand really what can be done. Can be done meaning that, so Larry Susskind that I work with also, the Larry is not feeling very well, so he was supposed to be here. So he tells something, he is trying to synthesize his 40 years of wisdom in negotiations, in mutual gains. So what he tells really at the end of his book is that something has to be good for you, better for me. What that means that we want to create those tradable opportunities, what Peter was referring to. So we want to create options that do not exist right now. So these are the options, those we have not even thought about. The example that I gave about Lake Tiberias. Lake Tiberias was there for last several hundred years. It's only in 1994 Jordan and Israel decided that, look, we don't worry about sovereignty really. I really need to get water. It will be stored in the in the wet season, so that I can get it big in the dry season. It's a very creative option. That is what trading is all about, with options that did not exist before. Those are the types of things that we need, and hopefully we'll continue this. So I put something on here. Those all I's are really actionable. So given that all these 1 billion people doesn't have access to clean water, there are 1 billion people have access to Facebook and Twitter these days. 4 billion text change hands every day. What we hope to do really with this group is, but it's such a wonderful conversation, we're going to continue this. So there is a sign-up sheet that is moving around. If you put your email address, we will be in touch, and let us continue this conversation really for at least next few months, maybe longer. If you have ideas that basically you want to promote within this group or even the larger group, and we'll try to summarize this and share it with you. And thank you very much for a very engaging conversation. I also thank our panel really for this.